Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Rachel Adams. I'm the Chief Curator and Director of Programs at the Bemis Center. Before we get started, there is closed captions available if you do need that. And also, just so you know, we are recording this for people that can't be here tonight. So just if you don't want your camera on, you can turn it off and we won't see your lovely face. But welcome again. We're so pleased to be hosting Kambui Olujimi tonight for our members and alumni art talks that we're doing. This is the second of 3 that we're doing this year. And this is sort of a celebration of our 40th year. Bemis turned 40 as of yesterday. Technically was our birthday. We had a little staff and resident birthday party at Okada. And we had this really great cake with a picture of Bemis on it. It was pretty wonderful. On behalf of everyone, we just want to thank you for joining us and being with us and supporting this organization over the past 40 years. So we're going to talk for a few minutes. I'm going to go through some slides of things that are happening and upcoming, and then Kambui and I will talk and he'll share his work, and then we'll leave some time for questions. So please feel free to ask questions along the way and or wait until the end to ask questions, however you feel you want to do that. And as I said, tonight is the second of 3 talks that we're doing. A little bit about the alumni program at Bemis is anyone who has gone through the residency program or exhibited at Bemis is considered an alum. And that is about 1,500 people over the 40 years. So it's a quite amazing group. And we are we've launched an alumni program that started in 2019, which includes, things like this, as well as alumni convenings that, of course, during the pandemic, we couldn't do, but going to different cities that we have a good amount of alumni base there to sort of have studio visits and go to like-minded institutions like Bemis and learn about them. We have an alumni residency program, which I'll talk about in a minute, and we have an alumni award. And this past year's 2020 was Diani Whitehawk. She was the winner. So we'll be getting ready to announce the next alumni award winner at the end of 2021. So keep your eye out for that. I am going to go through these slides really quickly. Last Saturday, we just opened our summer exhibitions, Altogether Amongst Many Reflections on Empathy, which is a 20-person group exhibition, which actually Kambui is part of, and Charlie Friedman's Soundtracks for the Present Future, which is in the back gallery, Gallery 4. That is actually on view until August 1st. And then for a short time, to coincide with our summer arts encounter, we'll have several sound suits by Nick Cave, Chicago-based Nick Cave, in the Gallery 4. And those will be on view just for a few days, but please, if you're in the area, please come see them, as well as Charlie's amazing piece. Speaking of that, we actually have a performance tomorrow night with Soundtracks for the Present Future by pianist Paul Barnes. So that starts at 7 p.m. tomorrow night. We are sold out of in-person tickets, but we will be streaming it on our Twitch channel. So if you want to watch from Twitch, that would be great. And if you miss it, we'll have it up for a few weeks, so you'll be able to experience it afterwards. All right. We're actually starting low-end performances in person again, which is really exciting. So our first, I should say, low-end in person of the year is with Sea Lavender on June 24th. And then on June 26th at 2 p.m. in the gallery, we'll have Sound Bath for Strength and Resilience, which will also be led by Lavender. And that will be a smaller in-person event, she has 2 sort of sides to her practice, experimental musician, and then sort of sound healing and art education. So you can come to both. In person, we will only be streaming the low-end performance. The Sound Bath will just be an in-person experience. So if you want to experience that, you need to come to Omaha to do so. We have a few open calls right now that are up. We're accepting applications for our fall 2022 artist in residence. So those are due on August 16th, and that's just our regular residency program. I shouldn't say regular because it's way more than regular, but that is our annual program that we have 3 times a year. And our fall residency is just a 2-month program. So it's a little bit shorter. And then we're also accepting for our Alumni Artists in Residence program. So this is the new program that I mentioned earlier. And this is a little bit different than the residency, the just Artists in Residence program, because there's sort of an added benefit of some financial support. So if you are an alumni, you can apply for this. And again, that means if you've exhibited at Bemis, or if you have done the residency in the past, you can come back for a sort of return residency, or maybe your first residency, but maybe a return to Bemis in a different way. And it will support you for 4 to 6 weeks, depending on how long you can be here. Regular monthly stipend will be prorated, and then we'll also do a $2,500 material stipend. So you can propose to use that in whatever way makes sense. If you have a big project that's coming up that is, maybe tied to something that you did at Bemis before, like that's a really great way to come back and do that residency. So those are also due August 16th. And then our third Bemis Alumni Art Talk will happen on September 14th with Stephanie Sahuko, who is also in the Altogether Amongst Many Reflection of the Empathy show. And Stephanie was a resident, I believe, in 2016. I could be wrong about that. I hope I'm not. Should have checked that. But we're excited to chat with Stephanie on September 14th. That is the end of my slides, so I'm going to stop sharing. Here we go. Hi, everyone. Okay. So I am going to introduce our esteemed guest today, Kambui Olujimi. Kambui was born and raised in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn, and received his MFA from Columbia University in New York. Olujimi's work challenges established modes of thinking that commonly function as inevitabilities. This pursuit takes shape through interdisciplinary bodies of work spanning sculpture, installation, photography, writing, video, and performance. Olujimi was a Bemis Center artist in residence in 2009, and his work is currently included in our exhibition on view until September 19th, so you have plenty of time to come see it. His work was also included in Bemis's 2016 exhibition, Time and Space Futures, and he has served as a Bemis board member since 2020. His solo exhibitions include Zulu Time, which was originated at the Madison Museum of Contemporary Art and traveled to the University of Buffalo at Art Galleries, where I worked back in 2018. That's how Kambui and I originally started working together. And A Life in Pictures at MIT List in Cambridge, the Q Arts Foundation, and Wayward North Art in General, and many other places. His works have premiered nationally at the Sundance Film Festival, the Studio Museum in Harlem, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, Museum of Contemporary Art Los Angeles, and MASMOCA. And internationally, his work has been featured at the Reina Sofia and in Madrid, and the Kunsthal Rotterdam in Holland, and the Kiyosama Museum of Contemporary Art in Finland, as well as Parasite Hong Kong. Olujimi has been awarded residencies from the Blackrock, Senegal, Skowhegan Center, School of Painting and Sculpture, Robert Rauschenberg Foundation, and McDowell, obviously, as well as Bemis. And he's received grants and commissions from numerous institutions, including the Jerome Foundation, NIFA and NISCA Fellowships, and the MTA Arts and Design. His work has been featured in the New Yorker, Art Forum, Art in America, The Guardian, CNN, the New York Times. Recently did a very big article, which we'll send a link to. And I actually, Kambui, I was saying, I read all the comments on that article earlier tonight, and they're so sweet and amazing. I don't know if anybody else ever reads the comments on things, but I decided to, and I highly suggest it if you want some more heartwarmingness after the article, which is already a beautiful article about his work. And yeah, I mean, there's so much to say about Kambui, but welcome. Thank you for being here tonight with us.
It's always fun to spend some time together. And thank you for having me. Hi, everybody at Bemis. Hi, everybody I haven't met yet. It's good to see everybody. How's the days going?
Everyone is muted, but you can all just chat in that you're doing well, hopefully, and enjoying your day. Kambui is going to share his screen, but before you do that, I actually wanted to read this quote that I found that you said, and I don't know when you said it. I'm sorry, I didn't I think it was recent though. But it was about residencies in general. And I feel like it sort of sets the tone in terms of thinking about, as an alum, and your time spent at Bemis, you were a resident here, you came back as an exhibiting artist, you came back as a panelist, and actually the residents, and several of them are actually on this call that are here this summer, are residents that you were on the panel for back in 2019. So we had a COVID summer last summer, and those residents are here. So that's really nice. Nice to see some of them tonight. And now a board member. And so you have a lot of experience with Bemis, but I'm just going to read this quote and we can kind of talk about it, and then we can kind of dig into your work. So you said, as a New Yorker, space is a challenge, and it's incredible to have 3 months when you're not paying rent. You're just working when you wake up and when you fall asleep. And that's really tough to get outside of college, but for an artist's career, that is just crucial. So I don't know if you want to take a minute to talk about that, just aspect of things. I love the idea of working as soon as you wake up, but you're also falling asleep working because you're just in the space. But we obviously know that Bemis is very much like that. So
yeah, it was really an amazing residency and an amazing time. And I think residencies can operate in so many different ways, depending on what they are, what you need, where you are in your career, where you are in your head space. But one of the things, scale was really crucial. I was in a 1-bedroom and trying to make, 20-foot pieces, even 15-foot pieces. My 1-bedroom, I literally chopped my entire living room and turned it into a shop. And it's just it was not, for my first solo show, and it was not the best idea I had all day. but so going to residencies like Bemis, like Fine Arts Work Center, and being able to, especially at Bemis, I think I didn't even have one of the biggest studios, but I was able to lay out and think about scale and what scale appropriateness was, and what scale is in terms of speed of viewing. And there's just a lot of things that happen with something that's as simple as space,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's, I know that I was talking to one of the residents yesterday at the birthday party, and they said, there's just so much space here, that is always, and of course, for COVID regulations, we actually had everyone quarantined for 5 days. So people, came here and got into their studios, which we know are all sizable, regardless of whether you have the small one or not. It's still pretty big. And then when you step out of quarantine and you're like, oh, and there's the 3rd floor installation space, and then there's the 5th floor, and then there's Okada, and then there's, low end and the basement now. And so it's, the space sort of feels infinite, I think, and really allows you to expand in terms of what you're thinking about.
And something that I think that's so crucial, relevant, and sort of invaluable, no matter where you go, which residency, is the conversations with other fellows. Who are you there with? I had a squad when I was there. I think Pablo was there from Mexico City. There's an artist from Mauritius. There's a Korean artist, Susan Chung, and we still hang out. And so the conversations that we were having when we were hanging out and doing our midnight runs, and, and hanging out at the donut shop, I know.
The donut shop is no longer.
I know.
Yeah, so sad.
And just all of that time was really, really great. And so, and a matter of fact, me and Susan, I worked on three projects with Susan. I went to Chicago, shot a music video for her. I did this one in Baltimore with her. So that's really a thing that will never show up on a brochure, you know?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, the collaborations and the friendships that happen within the cohorts. And we were just talking before everyone came on, because one of the pieces that's in the summer exhibition is by an artist, Marcus Fisher, who created it while on residence at the Rauschenberg Foundation when Kambui was also there. And so Kambui's voice is part of this soundtrack. And I was saying to Kambui the other day, I was here on Sunday and I just kept hearing your voice behind me, like resonating, you know, voicing all of these concerns of the time. And, but yeah, I love that, you know, pieces like that are very historical, because it's a marker of time, you know, of a political moment, but also of just a group of people that were spending that time together too, you know, which I think is really great. So.
Art is, for me, that's one of the things that's nice about the sort of legacy that falls outside of, well, is not centered in art history. Like, you know, we see the shows, we see the catalogs, but all of those artists, well, a lot of those artists had relationships that informed both the art and the people. And those relationships lasted, you know, decades, you know, and people would introduce people to people. And so I think I haven't found a way to really talk about it or capture it, but it's like most of it doesn't go up on the wall. It's something I'm always thinking about, you know, whenever you make a piece, most of it just is in the process, in the laughing, in the figuring out, in the trash, you know?
Yeah, definitely in the conversations for sure. So, well, you know, I think that was what felt missing from Bemis, at least last summer. And, you know, this past winter is just not having the residents here and not sort of seeing those relationships like building and, you know, the helping happen and just the runs to the grocery store or whatever that you just sort of see happening right away. I mean, I know our residents right now are starting to brainstorm a float for the Pride Parade, and that's really exciting. And so, yeah, I just love that those relationships happen and continue past wherever they are. But, you know, the Bemis family is large, so it's good. The floats. I'm excited about the float. Okay, do you want to share your screen and maybe talk about, because I actually think it's really interesting that the work that you're going to share is a lot of work that you actually made in the past year and a half during lockdown and quarantine times. So, you know, we can kind of go back to that idea of space and when you're limited in space, what you end up doing, right? So.
Yeah, it's this is a one of the things that I did end up doing is working 2D a lot. I didn't go to the studio too much. I didn't go to the studio for months. It just couldn't happen. And so I worked in the house. And so all of these paintings are, you know, tabletop, 9x12, 11x14. This is a painting, these first few are of Potter's Field. And the Potter's Field's in New York. And it's on Potter's Field is where you go, where they bury the unclaimed dead. So when someone dies and their body is not claimed by family or, you know, anyone, it's buried in a Potter's Field. And it's both in every place. Like it's kind of like there's one in every town, there's one in every city. Ours is on Hart Island, and Hart Island is a small little island between the Bronx and Queens, and they have been burying people here for over 100 years. And so during COVID, where I live in Elmhurst, it was extremely hard hit. And so you would see these refrigeration trucks, and you were definitely aware of people dying and there not being a space to mourn, and they're not physically being a space to mourn, like we couldn't gather, but also a space to sort of process it, you know. And so for me, things were happening at such a speed during quarantine. This was the only way to sort of even scratch the surface of processing, dialogue, memorializing, remembering, because in like 3 news cycles, you can see a shift. You can see how the story gets told on Monday and it's radically different than the way it's told on Friday. And I think often when I go to look at an event, the way it's told is already skewed, already doesn't, picture to me a sort of full spectrum of those people involved. One thing I should say, definitely jump in if you have a question. And Rachel, if you have any comment or question,
Yeah.
just something about Hart Island is there's a prison. It's a jail. It's not a prison, and it's Rikers Island. The inmate, the incarcerated folks there, do all of the burying, and so there was something just like eerie about that cycle, that sort of feedback between being incarcerated and in a lot of ways forgotten by society or pushed to the edge of society's visibility. And then these folks who have passed, who in a lot of ways are sort of similar. And then it brought up a lot, how do we treat those that how you treat your dead is kind of a mark of a society. And what do you do when it's there's no way to mark status, there's no way to mark lineage. Where's the base level of consideration? And so those are some of the things that I've thought about. And a lot of reform, a lot of things have happened in terms of the visitation rights for family members, the logging of it, like over the years. So this is something that, like I said, most of the things that the dust that got kicked up in this work, I'm gonna be unpacking for a minute.
Mm-hmm. And can I just ask, the imagery, is it coming from like news cycle, or are you sort of are you kind of rearranging it, or are you painting from images that you're seeing?
I tend to do collage is kind of the first, like my first art as a kid. I was like, oh, can you scissors? This art thing, you got me. So I do use source material, sometimes historic, sometimes video, sometimes stills, and then then you lean into it, and then you start to build. And sometimes there's one that's explicit that near the end where it's a mashup of 3 different time periods, and so things like that. It was just surreal seeing people in hazmat suits,
right?
And
sort
then,
of like science fiction meets like weirdly like 1950s with the the authoritative figure with the gun and like the far background. So it feels very bizarre in a way, but also very real at the same time, I think.
yeah, and that's very much what so much of this time really felt surreal. And this was one of the death of George Floyd really kind of rang a bell in America. And it was a bell that had been ringing, but I felt like there was some circling back where honestly, for me, it was something that people were coming to me and being like, this is crazy. It's just, you don't feel hunted? And I was like, I've been felt hunted. Like this is, this is something horrible that is part of an American DNA that hasn't been dealt with. And I think it was a moment not of reckoning, but a moment where even folks who had denied this there was no place to hide. And I remember when the 3rd precinct in Minneapolis was set on fire because there was still not an indictment. I don't know, there was a lot of so it's funny because it's just emotional in a way that is not like I have all of the things that we say around this time, you know. And I maybe I won't say much about it. It was familiar, and it was disgusting and horrible that it was familiar, and that a blatant murder had taken place, and there was still thoughts that maybe nothing's gonna happen, you know.
Yeah.
And I'd be open if the people have questions, but in terms of like going through it, it's just a lot. It's, you know, one of the things that did stick out in my mind was fireworks, and so fireworks being thrown into the fire, and it's hard to see here, but there's iridescent and gold flakes all through this painting. So as you move, it sort of shimmers, and it made me. You know, our national anthem is essentially a war song, but fireworks are both a sort of surrogate of warfare and, you know, simulation of warfare, but also a sort of poetic abstraction of that violence. And so it seems so apropos for what was happening in that moment. And the things that I remember so much about fireworks in general, I used to want to work with I think it's the Grucci family.
The Gucci family?
I thought it was Grucci.
Oh, Grucci.
I could be
Sorry.
wrong because that was the fireworks family. Yeah, they'll edit it out. They'll put the correct name, but they're a famous firework family, and I used to always want to work with them and, you know, do fireworks, and the sound where you see the flash and then there's this little pause and then you feel the thump go through you. You feel like shock wave. Whenever I think about fireworks, I think about that pause right before it cuts you. It cuts right through. It doesn't even cut. It like swallows you inside out.
It's, you know, I think it's one of those feelings that it never changes, I think, from when you're a child to an adult, right? Like that feeling. Because I remember, yeah, I totally know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I still feel that way, like when I see fireworks, at least. Like when I want to see fireworks, I should say.
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't.
You can hear it move. You can hear the sound move.
Yeah.
And so I think it probably informed this suite in terms of like how we start here and we start to move away. In my mind's eye, I was like driving, but it was like flying away from the scene. You know, kids be kids.
I really like, can you say the title of this piece? Is it like,
it's like, what is the title?
I might have it, hold on.
Yeah,
or at least I have
like,
the file name, I'm assuming. Thermal scan makeout.
Yeah. Because, you know, you go out, I would go on these long walks, like these 3-hour walks, which were basically walking in a lot of circles. And there was, you know, teenagers out there during the pandemic trying to make out, and you can't ask, you know, it's hard to go without touch. And this is sort of the human toll of it that I was thinking about. and and I wanted it to me. It's sort of funny, but it also talks about it. It reminds me of a sort of the serious impact. Like when my cousin gave me this hug. I saw him. I haven't seen him in almost 2 years. He gave me a hug. Like I don't know. Like it was. It felt like we were born together. You
Mm,
know, like I don't see my cousin every day, but it just felt like, man, it was a homecoming. It was so there's so much that we get from touch that we can't sort of verbalize, and we're missing that. We're I mean, and scientists talk about it, you know, like all the things that it does for brain chemistry and, you know, our health. But I also think there's probably stuff that's in between.
yeah, I think you're right. Obviously I was lucky to sort of, quarantine with my husband and my son and my dog. So at least I did have people to hug, but there was something about giving my friend the first hug that was outside of that little family unit, kind of like what you were saying, like it was just an unbelievable feeling of just someone else besides, those three people that I'd been with. So
Well, it wasn't. I mean, I was getting my daily hugs, man. But
yeah.
I feel like part of it is like our love circle is huge, and you
Hmm.
forget it.
Hmm.
You know, like people who I ran into somebody the other day. I mean, I might not have seen it, probably saw him 5 years ago, but I was like, we used to hang out all the time, like eat off of the same fork, you know, that kind of thing. And it's
Yeah.
just those people, even if you see them once every 5 years, that fuels you and it reminds you of who you are. And so we've been really divorced of ourselves,
Yeah.
you know, during this time. This is a piece about from the Korean baseball. They didn't know what to do with empty stands, and so there was a lot of different things that got tried, and one of the ones that stuck were these stuffed animals, and it's just like so surreal, you know. There were cardboard cutouts, there were sex dolls, and then they were like, no, 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 we're gonna just do the stuffed animal. It's like stuffed animals are kind of insane expressions, 20,000 insane expressions. But I was like, this is the moment we're living. And we also like sports took on like I'm a sports fan, and it's a space where so many dramas happen, and aspirations happen, and faith, and like
Emotion, so much emotion in sports, right?
so much.
It's just funny to like look at this and see the expressions of these stuffed animals, which I are very true to like what stuffed animals feel like in this reproduction. And like, the snowman, especially, just this like blank stare is just like, oh, it's
I
so
like,
good.
I like this teddy bear just been on a 8-day bender. forgot it had front row seats.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, the ET is good too. I agree, Allie. Oh, yeah, I appreciate the humor in that one very much.
Yeah.
It's
I
good to
mean, it
laugh.
was all happening at the same time. Like I was blessed. So I started doing these, and it was these. I was thinking about all these like alarm clocks, and just like people, I don't know. I felt like even in the midst of this, there was a level of like bold-faced denial in action and policy and leadership, and it was baffling to me. And I thought about these like alarm clocks that every garage has, like from the '80s or the '70s, or you know, and just thinking about snoozing. And so I started doing these paintings with the death count, and this was my birthday,
Hmm.
my first birthday during quarantine. And you'll see that sort of count as it goes through as we go through some of the work. um,
You're very attracted to those kinds of clocks because you have them in our Zuludheim installation too with the Prut Igo piece. So
yeah,
that's a Kambui. icon for me. Whenever I see those, I think of you. I'm not gonna lie.
I love those clocks. I feel like there's a clock like that in everybody's garage, closet, somewhere. They might not know. It might have even come with the apartment. Um, yeah. When we were kids, we would always put the clock forward, maybe like an hour and 10 minutes. But then it got to the point where we had 5 clocks in 5 times. And so you knew not only what the sort of like that idea of time being fluid or relative was really practical, like growing up. And I knew like my sister's alarm clock was different than my mom's alarm clock, and I didn't have an alarm clock. They just tell me where to be. But yeah, so I always think about that too with those. So there was all this talk when things were locked down. Sorry, I'm not sorry. When things were locked down, and they're like, we have to have these salons open. We have to have be able to get nails and hair done. And it was talked about in this way of sort of condemnation. And I was talking to somebody about this the other day in the studio, that it happens over and over. And it happened when it was like, I think particularly when when Black women are being talked about, like during a welfare conversation in the 80s. It's this idea that that is the most frivolous thing to do, when in fact, it's a part of a care. It's a part of a pause. And if it was meditation or seeing, a therapist, or there's like a whole host of things that are in a different economic bracket, but also cultural bracket where it's seen as like, oh, of course. And so I started, even before the attacks in Atlanta, I was thinking about that space of restoration. And I've always sort of been attracted to the whether it's a barbershop, whether it's a salon, whether it's going to get your hair done at your aunt's, or getting that bad haircut from your cousin who's going to barber school, but it's not going to make it. So, yeah.
I think that, yeah, and I mean, I agree with you that there is something about that level of care that that we all want to sort of gift ourselves sometimes. I mean, I try to do that for myself every once in a while, and hadn't done it until like 2 weeks ago, where I like treated myself to going to get my nails done. Like, they look pretty, right? Like, and it was like a 2-hour thing, and I just like lived in it and loved it, and was like, this is something that I think is necessary for, and it's like kind of an inexpensive way to sort of give yourself that time and that care. And obviously then like support an economy too, of a whole group of people that, that's their livelihood too. So it talks to that as well, for sure.
A lot of people have like, I had one barber that was like my barber when I was growing up. And I remember when he moved, he like went to another spot, and I was like, I was a teenager, and I would always go see Big Mike. Always, always, always. He left. I was like, I don't even care what you do to my hair. I don't even care. I was just like, I went in there, I got a bad haircut, a bad lineup. I was just like, it don't even matter now. And it was like a solid year of like just experimental, and not in a good way, experimental haircuts. And, you have to, it's a relationship, it's somebody that you talk to for a certain amount of time, and they like, also hook you up so that you look presentable for the things that you do in the world.
Yeah.
This is Memorial Day.
Then we can keep going.
Yeah, and then there's just like little moments like this where like I'm sure in a year no one's going to talk about the removal of mailboxes so that you can't vote by mail. Um, and so it's just like things that just seem so insidious. Um,
Yeah, and I mean, this is starting to kind of move forward in 2020, like, probably what, summer time,
this is election day,
election day.
and just like this was one that I think I made it the day before election day, and the notion that in preparation for a free election, you build multiple walls and fences around the Capitol just seemed baffling to me. Um, it didn't actually seem baffling. It just seemed tragic.
Mm.
This was something that was kind of, this piece sort of fell out of me. Um, and I remember thinking, man, that's kind of a nice day out. It made me think, how are you going to have something so ominous on such a nice day? But there was also real talk about relinquishing power, and we were talking with we were faced with fascism, and it was fascist in all its exercises, and that kind of dictatorial space had been met with violence. And as I was sort of thinking about how the crazier you act, the more you invite that kind of behavior, and there was protesters who started to put guillotines on Bezos's lawn. Like they came and were building it. And it seemed like there was something so surreal, like a red carpet for, a guillotine. There was just so many surreal moments that were happening, like plugging Goya for supporting the president. Like it was just too much. And I think that it pushed the work into a kind of, some of the humor falls into camp, and some of it seems a little, and I think that I appreciated that like some of them are gregarious, but the moment itself was actually even more insane. And I think it's hard to be, so part of it, this collection of work, I want to do some writing, but I think it's hard if you had said, like there's like thousands of things that happen that if you wrote it and you said you wanted to make a movie about it, they were like, no, that's too over the top.
Yeah, like it's a complete bizarro world in a way, that it actually happened. I think that, yeah, but I do think like something about having some sort of writing. And you did do the Creative Time Project, which had some writing tied to it. And I'm just gonna put it out there too, but if anyone has any questions, like feel free to chat them in during this and I'll get them asked too. So
Yeah, how are we doing on time? Are we okay?
I think we're good. I don't know. I think we're doing okay. we can probably move faster, but I'm enjoying this, so I'm hoping everyone else is.
I'm like a good pace. I feel like
Yeah.
we're like 2/3 through.
Yeah, we're good.
This was New Year's Eve.
And is that the death count as of New Year's Eve, the 345,000? Yeah.
And we're always moving in spaces of simultaneity, but it just seemed like, while this was happening, there was a push, a push to, kill people for having health laws that protected citizens. Like that was not even uncommon in this country at that time. There's a, yeah. One of the things that also got re-examined and interrogated was the idea of the heroic figure. This is Lincoln. And so I picked Lincoln and Jackson in part because on a sort of political spectrum, Lincoln's good guy, liberal. There's this notion of that. Or even somebody like Washington, who also enslaved people. But then there's the Confederates. And so there's a real reckoning to both the economic, history of this country and the moral history of this country. And so, but it wasn't just this country. So this was in Leopold II, who actually annexed, Congo and committed genocide. The only statues in Brussels in Antwerp, and people have been asking for them to be removed. So it was set on fire during this last summer 2020, yeah. And this work is called Your King is on Fire. It's a triptych, and there's a notion in the West that when you make a memorial, those values, that heroic figure is outside of time, and actually will survive. This person is so lauded that they will remain as hero forevermore. And in fact, when it gets erected, the communities that they're erected in, that's not the way they function. They often function particularly as intimidation. It's, the people, there's not buy-in from communities, and in Martinique, there's a sculpture, and the head gets lopped off every year. Like, people don't want it.
Yeah, but they keep bringing it back.
Sims, there's been protests, for Sims, that statue that got removed in New York on I think it's 110th, got removed, but they've been protesting pretty much since it went up. And so these are not new conversations. And so the idea that it's been up and now all of a sudden there's a groundswell. It's really about the dam that has been pushing it back, and all those resources that have been pushing back and rejecting these figures, these histories, these untruths, is starting to crumble.
Right. What I think I actually heard on the radio the other day, and I can't remember what city they were talking about, but it was something about, it's like, oh, this cost the city $2.3 million. And it was about removing a monument. But most of that money actually it was legal fees, because the people that were protesting the removal of the not the people that wanted to remove it and just take it down, and it costs, however much it does to take a crane to it and move it. But it was like all of the people in the city or surrounding area that were mad that it was getting removed, and them suing and the city having to pay that. And I was like thinking about how much money that was and how much that could go into all of these different areas, right? Instead of being put into the pockets of people that were like protesting, like a Lee statue being removed or whatever.
I would love financial transparency for municipalities. I think when people, for myself, as I've looked at where money goes, first, how much money like New York City has, and then how much money New York City, and I'm just using it because, that's my home, spends on police misconducts, like just paying when there's, police are found guilty for police misconduct, how much money is spent in settlements and how much is expected, it's in the hundreds of millions every year. That's not something that is that's something that's even expected. You expect to have
They budget for it, is what you're saying.
you budget like, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars to take care of that. There's a problem in design, and I think that's the place that I'm looking to interrogate. That there's a problem in design. It's you can execute it 80 different ways, but if the intent is rotten, you're not going to win that.
Sam just chatted in and said, and think about how transparent artists have to be for commissions. And I feel like that's so true because, you know, when artists get commissioned, especially to do these big public art projects, they have to just like down to the penny, where every penny is going. That is a very, very true point, Sam. Thank you.
And I'll say, Sam, for commissions, and this is something that I learned doing commissions, budget in a financial person. Just be like, this is you know, don't do it yourself, you know, budget in a bookkeeper, you know, account expenses. I had a commission and I needed to open up a separate account for all the payments. And it came with fees. So those fees go in. So always, I think that along with financial reporting is another thing that, you know, they don't tell you about in art school.
No, definitely not. Good advice, Kambui.
There's a moment of admission that atemporal space had failed, that, you know, in this case, Robert E. Lee was not beloved forever. And his ideals and his principles were not the principles of the people of this land forever, you know, or ever. And in that moment of admission, there's a statue will be tarked, but it's sort of the other end of the ribbon, as when a statue is about to be unveiled. And so I was really interested in tarping. This is where this is the bull, you know, downtown in Wall Street, because as a symbol of capitalism, NYPD was worried that that would be a target. And just this process of almost covering it like you know, like a child, you're putting it to bed, and maybe for the last time, you know, but before it's removed. And similarly when it's unveiled. And so that moment of precariousness, is like the cat is both alive and dead in that moment. And so that's been a sort of point of exploration with these paintings, and even this piece here, which is like an early collage.
Yeah, and I love that early collage a lot. We talked about that the other day, which goes back to your first art love of collage. But just like, you know, how, I don't know, this, you know, it's like you said, it's trash bag on Xerox, right? And there's something very simple about that, but there's also like the way that like the formalness of the trash bag and all like the creases that happen and like the sort of slickness of it. There's just something that for me, it really feels very like otherworldly or ghostly, like this thing just kind of like moving through the landscape. You know, this sort of like what looks like this kind of southern type of, you know, park or something like that too. So
I like it re-photograph. I like the photograph. And for me, it's that repetition or proliferation of these ideas or images. And then the landscape, you know, where these monuments fall shape are either in conversation with urban landscape or shape it, you know?
Yeah. If anyone has any questions, please, again, feel free to chat them in about any of this work or Kambui's practice at all, because I think we're sort of close to the end of the slides.
Yeah. This was the one, I think this is one of the last ones. And it's, so Franklin Delano Roosevelt?
That's
FDR.
FDR
No,
or
Theodore.
Theodore Roosevelt.
Theodore Roosevelt has a sculpture in front of the Met. And, oh no, the Museum of Natural History. And it's being removed, and this was something that was sort of interesting. It was thought of as being progressive in its depiction in the time, but it wasn't, because there's like an African man, a Native American man, and on the floor, and then on the ground, and then above them on a horse is Theodore Roosevelt. Those communities, they feel like hyper progressive. So it's unveiled in 1940, and this painting has that unveiling. It has the museum now, and then the museum has committed to removing it this year. So we'll see. I don't know if it's been removed yet. And so there were those three moments sort of collapsed in this one work. And I was just interested in both the aspiration, the realization, and all of the conversations that happened in between, where, the museum for a while was saying that they would happily remove it, but it wasn't owned by them. And the family was like, we would do it, but it's not up to us. And so,
like, everyone is sort of passing the buck in that sense. Yeah. I think, now that you've sort of explained this piece of kind of having the past, present, future kind of colliding, I think that's a really, it's sort of an interesting way to think about what a monument is, because it kind of is the past, present, and future colliding in general, right? Is this idea that whether that person or that action is memorialized at that time doesn't mean that it always will be. And that, some people may have been for it, some people may have been against it. And what does that look like? What does like a living monument look like? I think that's, it's a really hard question to answer, but something that I've been thinking about a lot. Thinking about, I think that they linked to the New York Times article about your work about Miss Arlene, and like just the way that you sort of worked through so many different iterations of this woman that really meant a lot to you, and sort of memorializing her in this way, and sort of how do we memorialize people or times.
Over five. That was a 5-year project that Rachel was talking about, and so you have this up and down, this like play, reverence, and it talks about that slippage. In the monument report that the Cultural Affairs Department of New York City did around their monuments, the Lenape's representative talked about having just space for having a space as a monument. And that space then gets activated for storytelling, for dance, for performance. And that is the monument, the space that you reserve.
Right.
And you can see it in vernacular, whether it's, something as simple as like something temporal, like pour one out, or, namesakes, like there's a lot of sort of ways in which we remember, and it's a process of remembering.
Yeah.
And this is the last, I think this is the last one. Yeah, this is the last slide. It was sketches for the first memorial of January 6th, and it's the barricade, one of the barricades that was used to save the lives of our lawmakers. And something I thought about how impromptu it was, and how in a second this gets put together, and then we reconstruct those moments. And so it would be, to me, I thought it would be amazing to take something and scale it up to a size of architecture, like, you know, a building complex. So I'm hopefully getting more images of the different barricades that were
That were
erected, I
created.
guess.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I'm interested in those and just seeing where it leads.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Kambui, for that. That was really wonderful. I don't know if anyone has any questions to chat in, but we, yeah, I guess maybe sort of like looping back to your time at Bemis, and thinking about like, you know, this new body of work that you've been doing. I mean, was there something that that you worked on at Bemis that you feel like, you know, sort of put you on a different path, or, you know, I don't know, sorry, that's like kind of a random question because we were talking about some really deep subjects, but I'm trying to kind of like bring it back to thinking about like, you know, the time that you do spend on like certain projects and how, you know, how that informs your next body of work, or, you know, the
It
place that
bounces
you're in.
around. It all like sort of bounces around. So, you know, something will sit in my head for a long time, normally like a year or two, and it might even take 2 or 3 years to come out fully. And then there's on the flip side. So I sort of think about it in terms of like sumo wrestling. Like a lot happens before that, like 2 seconds of collision and weight transfer. And so, it's a fun process. And I remember I was at Bemis and I was talking to Hesse about how I'm trying to work and Cassavetes, and I was like, you know, it's like trying to get an avalanche into a teacup. And there's this moment where you just like, you start it and you just ride that avalanche. You're in the midst of it, you hope it doesn't kill you. And then there's a honing, like you take all of that and you try and bring it into something that is layered and focusable and resonant. And so I think for me, that's what I'm always trying to do. And, you know, there are times that when I look at my work and I judge its successfulness and its failures, I judge it based on that sort of balance, because sometimes you get lost and you take that L, but if you're not willing to, like, you don't get any wins, you know. And so, you know, it's fun. You get to play.
I'm going to see if I can unmute Chris to ask his question, because I feel like.
Yeah, if you have questions, oh yeah.
Can you unmute now, Chris? Ah, okay.
Hey, Chris.
Thanks. Hi, Kambui. Great to see you.
Good to see you.
Thanks for sharing so much work with us. I just, you know, as you were sharing all the work and talking through some of the context behind the work, I kept on just drawing this correlation between an act of like all of these factors coalescing simultaneously. So being forced to work at such an intimate scale at your dining room table, to working in watercolor that forces you to work quickly, and then this, at least the work that you decided to share with us tonight, this capturing of current events, you know, and let's face it, last year was hard to keep up with because there was so much going on a daily basis. And I just saw this collapse in time and this amount of speed one might have to work on and to be thinking through. So I was just kind of bringing all that to my my mind as you were talking. I was just wondering, do you see any correlation with that, with, working in the specific medium to, trying to capture important moments of our time?
Yeah, that's a good question. And thank you. My boy Christopher Myers, he said to me one time, I was like, yeah, I don't really paint. And I was like, but I'm doing these these watercolors, and I was describing to him how it worked and how I was thinking about it. And he was like, you really talk about it as though it's performance and dance. I'm like, oh, you get it wet, then you draw like this, you hold, you wait, then you go, then you wait and see, and you pull back, and I'm interested in the different layers of time. When something's wet and it moves and then it dries, versus like a one stroke that's a really fine line, just kiss and it's gone, and it might even like fade in. So I think about it as, and I think about it as movement and performance, and that's was really helpful during a time when I didn't have a lot of space for movement or performance. But I think that's one thing that draws me to this medium over oils and acrylic. I like ink. And I'd be interested also, if I don't know if we have more questions, but just how the current residents are doing there, and how they're acclimating to the space and having space, especially coming out of possibly not having, not being able to have 5,000, 6,000 square foot installation space.
I just hopefully pin some of them to talk. There you go, Julia.
Hey, Kambui, nice to see you again. It's so great to talk about your watercolors, because I've been following it during the pandemic and, during the more apparent civil unrest. So it's been very inspiring to me too, to be at home in my own studio, to watch you working in these more traditional methods that are more readily available, I guess. But the residency's been wild. It's been so nice to have all this space and, get together with this amazing cohort of random people who are doing crazy things and have crazy ideas and conversations of just yelling at each other, but in a very positive, fun way. So yeah, it's been nice. And then getting to know Omaha now that everything's kind of opening up too has been surreal and exhausting. And yeah, that's my kind of personal take.
Hopefully you get some rest time, like just read a book or just read your notes from a year ago. That's something that's always, to me, low-key luxurious about residencies, like processing anything, both good and bad. Like, oh, I've been meaning to watch this movie, And now I'm gonna watch all the movies that the director did tonight.
Oh, that sounds so nice.
Hey, Kambui, this is Derek with Tomorrow. I think you showed a piece of film at Aspect Ratio Gallery in Chicago, and Jefferson Goddard talks about you all the time. I think so. But I'm a resident here too, and yeah, I'm kind of just taking it easy for the first 3 weeks, honestly. I kind of let the process come to me a little bit. And so I get to wake up in this big studio and think about how I will eventually feel it. But if I want to sleep for 24 hours or I want to go out and just explore Omaha and take a 2 or 3 hour walk in this 90-degree heat, I just kind of do it. And I'm trying not to, in my practice, which is really a meditation for me on rest or labor, try to labor throughout this whole residency. I really just kind of want to be in dialogue with everyone here and just kind of develop some type of, I don't know, ease of making. I commented in the text or in the chat, just the ease with which you talk about very heavy things. And the delivery actually, as if that is the performance, to just sort of talk without the weight. I thought that was just beautiful. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, man. Have you had a chance to hit up the Ethiopian restaurant? There's, I think it's on Leavenworth. Is that still there with the music videos?
Is that one still there? I'm not sure.
There's
There is another Ethiopian place in the old market.
Yeah, I went to that one when I was there. I think the one that I wanted to go to, that one I used to go to on
Yeah.
Leavenworth, was just not open when I was there last, but I don't know if they're still in business. I hope so.
I'll look it up. I'll look it up.
Yeah, that was a spot. But yeah, I feel you where you're talking about this. You know, something will happen. Like I'll go to a residency, and artists are. I feel like I, as an artist, I'm always asked, or often asked, okay, you know, sum it up. Like pretend like you know yourself. When in fact, like I'm in flux. I don't really know, you know, but I have language skills to pretend that things sort of coalesced in a certain period of time and it led to a definable thing, when in fact, it might gestate in you for 2 years, or it might lead you to a project that started there but goes on for 10 years, you know, and just being open to all of those seeds, you know, is really, I think, beautiful and wise, what you're talking about, just like soaking it in, you know.
I agree. And that is perfect segue into applying for the alumni residency if you're an alum on this call. So don't forget about that deadline. Well, Kambui, thank you so much for your time tonight and your work and everything that you do and your hugs when I actually get to hug you in person. I cannot wait to do that again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank everybody for coming out and making the time, you know. Yeah, and all of the comments. Thank you.